Hello, I'm Len Long. I'd like to welcome you to this presentation, and many thanks to the Boston section for hosting this program. The Boston section is composed of professional staff, which is unique to IEEE. It allows for an abundance of individualized professional services for its 8,000 members. The manager is Bob Alongi, ably assisted by Ms. Karen Safina. We offer all sorts of services and conferences, live webinars, and online courses, and a newspaper called the E-Reflector. Here's a listing of some of the live webinars which are presently being offered. Also, the section offers many online courses and face-to-face courses. It also offers a newspaper called the E-Reflector, which is distributed monthly and bi-monthly. And most important, it offers the members a volunteer leadership opportunity for many of the sections, and it offers many resources which the engineer can use in his or her work.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Net Zero CO2 with Nuclear Hydrogen and Geothermal, a presentation by Paul H. Carr, PhD, IEEE Life Fellow. I'm John Horrigan. We're glad to have you here. As usual with Dr. Carr, we look at different ways of making our planet greener. How can we be more economical and defer to the environment? Paul, it's great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, as you can see on my title slide, Net Zero Carbon Dioxide with Nuclear Hydrogen and Geothermal. And I'm going to be talking about small, modular, mass-produced nuclear reactors, and then deep geothermal that will be included. Here's an overview. Can these new technologies save us by 2050? Well, see what you think at the end. I'm optimistic. The electrolysis of water generates green hydrogen, and this is a way of storing solar, wind, and nuclear energy. And it's also a fuel source. Green hydrogen is also a fuel source. You can burn it and get the energy back. Since 1989, the hope for cold fusion, namely the electrolysis of heavy hydrogen water, D2O, has fizzled. And we need mass-produced, cheap, small, modular fission reactors to generate green electricity 24/7. Of course, wind and solar can do it roughly 33% of the time, but we need energy. We need electricity all the time. Deep geothermal is also poised for a breakout. That's also a source of 24/7 electricity. It's and this breakout could be similar to the horizontal drilling that made natural gas cheaper than coal. In other words, instead of drilling horizontally, we just drill deeper. And then toward the end, pretty exciting new development in hot nuclear fusion generated electricity at a company, an MIT spinoff that I'll be talking about. And they're talking maybe of demonstration by 2025 of commercially viable fusion energy, right on our own Fort Devens in Massachusetts. Well, here's an overview of which countries are generating the most carbon dioxide on a per person basis. Of course, China is the biggest emitter. They have over 1 billion people, but on a per person basis, they're comparable to Europe. And you see United States on a per person basis is the biggest emitter. Back when gasoline was 30 cents a gallon, you can see our carbon emissions were really going up. But as soon as gasoline hit $1 or so, you can see our carbon dioxide emissions went down. And then you can see we didn't make too much progress. And during that time, Europe, where gasoline is twice the price of the United States, is considerably lower that of the United States, and their carbon emissions were going down. Our biggest breakthrough was when natural gas turned out to be cheaper than coal. As you can see, that's when our carbon dioxide emissions went down. So natural gas electricity has half the carbon dioxide emissions as coal, and that's the reason our emissions went down. Well, here's an overview of horizontal drilling. Traditional drilling is vertical, and horizontal drilling down the order of a kilometer made natural gas cheap, as shown here. And if we were smart enough, my feeling is if we're smart enough to learn to do horizontal drilling, we should be smart enough to learn to drill deeper. And if we can get down about a kilometer, 10 kilometers, we can generate steam for 24/7 steam generated electricity. So that's an exciting possibility that could be coming along. You can see the history of our carbon dioxide emissions. Of our coal burning. You can see coal burning, which is black, has been going down, and that's because natural gas is less expensive for the same amount of energy, and generates half it has as much carbon dioxide as coal for the same amount of energy. You can see natural gas is going up. So this is the reason for our drop in carbon dioxide emissions. You can see nuclear pretty stable here, but long term, how are we going to replace natural gas? Assuming we continue to phase out coal, but long term, if we want to get to cut back on our carbon dioxide emission, natural gas does emit carbon dioxide. So what are we going to ramp up? Well, it's pretty obvious that already nuclear is 20% of our electricity comes from nuclear, and we need to ramp up nuclear. That's 24/7. Hydro is 24/7, but there's not much more water that can be dammed up. Wind is increasing and solar is increasing, as shown, but they're not 24/7, but they play a role, particularly in generating green hydrogen. And then all other, which would be geothermal, is for some people think it's poised for a breakthrough. We need more nuclear, wind, solar, and geothermal to replace CO2 from natural gas. France is a very progressive country. President Macron said France would aim to become a leader in green hydrogen by 2030 and build new small nuclear reactors, as he unveiled a 5-year investment plan on recently. And he said they're planning to build a low carbon airplane, a small modular reactor, as two mega factories to produce green hydrogen, all by the end of the decade. And they're also going to produce large numbers of electric vehicles. Well, it turns out that Germany's wind and solar capacity is 5 times that of France. Well, why is it then Germany's carbon dioxide emissions are 5 times greater? Any comments from my audience here?
If you could repeat the question.
Germany has 5 times the wind and solar, but why are its emissions greater than France?
Perhaps they're not using nuclear or natural gas as efficiently?
Right, I think it's nuclear. Well, it's mainly that Germany is phasing out its nuclear reactors, and France gets 75% of its electricity from nuclear. That's there 24/7. Germany's problem is that when the wind is blowing and the sun isn't shining, they've had to burn dirty coal, which they do have, but they're also interested in importing natural gas from Russia, which has political problems, particularly now as if you've been watching the news. Anyway, let's talk about green hydrogen. The basic way we generate green hydrogen is to take electricity, pass an electric current through a water solution, so a solution of water, just plain water, through water, and we generate just through water, and this electricity breaks water into its basic components: hydrogen, which we want to save, and oxygen, which we already have plenty in the air. So we save the hydrogen, and it comes from green hydrogen comes from green energy sources of energy, namely wind, solar, and nuclear. Maybe geothermal in the future. I want to talk, while we're talking about electrolysis of water, I'm going to talk about cold fusion in a minute, which is the electrolysis of deuterium, which is heavy water. But I first want to talk about, to put that in perspective, is why cold fusion was of great interest, about hot fusion, which is what happens in the sun. The sun is millions of degrees hot, millions of degrees, and basically the sun is basically a gigantic ball of hydrogen, and inside the sun, the hydrogen atoms are heated so much that they turn into a plasma state where electrons no longer orbit protons in the atom's nuclei. The freed nuclei then fuse to form helium, and the fusion process releases vast amount of energy, and that's the energy that makes life possible on Earth. This is a diagram illustrating cold fusion. In 1989, two electrochemists, Fleischmann and Pons, reported that their electrolysis of heavy water, namely deuterium, had produced anomalous heat, which they thought was cold fusion. Basically, you see they used a palladium cathode, and they thought that the heating occurred on this palladium cathode. It was known that the hydrogen is absorbed by the heavy hydrogen was absorbed by the palladium, and the hypothesis that since it was heavy water, and the nucleus of heavy water consists of a proton and a neutron, that the two deuterium nuclei in this palladium cathode, maybe in a purity or something, came close enough together to fuse into helium and giving off energy. That was the hypothesis. And given the fact that it's very hard to get millions of degrees on Earth that we need for hot fusion, a lot of excitement about this, and many people tried to reproduce their results. And the most recent, and it basically failed. And it was still been of great interest. And as late as 2019, Google funded another attempt to reproduce the possibility of cold fusion. And this is published in Nature in 2019. So cold fusion has fizzled, and that's why we need next generation nuclear fission. And this is the future of nuclear fission. I think economical nuclear fission. The problem with building today's nuclear power plants, and you've seen these big, massive steel reinforced concrete structures, over half the cost of the nuclear plant is in building that concrete structure. And each nuclear reactor has to be approved separately. That's most of the cost is in building the concrete structure. Well, the proposal is to have low-cost miniature modular nuclear plants that are mass-produced in a factory. They can be trucked to the generation site in a truck. And working with the U.S. Department of Energy, NuScale Power in Portland, Oregon plans to build a 12-module plant in Idaho. The 50-megawatt design has already been approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, so you don't have to improve each reactor site. It's an approved design, and will be mass-produced to reduce costs by 2030. Now, self-contained light water reactions, these reactors will be installed in a concrete hole lined in the ground. So you don't have the NIMBY, the problem of that big concrete structure that everybody can look at and be worried about. You won't see them. And this should be a much lesser way of installing nuclear reactors than at present. And I'll give you a little more detail that they're safer than our modern reactors. This is how they work. Basically, the nuclear reactor core. The nuclear reactor core generates heat, heats the pressurized water. The hot water rises, as shown here, and there's a heat exchanger up here, and that heat exchanger generates steam, which drives the turbines of an electrical generator. And then, since the hot water has given up its energy, it's colder and it's heavier, and then it cools down, as shown here. It just goes back down, and so the CO2, the water, the pressurized water, circulates by convection, and there are no external pumps, and the operator invention or operator invention needed for a safe shutdown. So these are safer and cheaper than now. This is an actual plot of NuScale's, one of their reactors, modular reactors. You can see the steam comes out the top rather than the side. And of course, what is a coal plant? Well, a coal plant uses dirty coal to generate steam. And the proposal, NuScale's proposal is, well, we'll replace this dirty coal burning steam generator with our nuclear reactors, and we can still use the same turbines to generate the electricity. And small Rochester places that produce steam to that's the proposal. But it looks like they were scooped by Bill Gates. Bill Gates has selected a site of new nuclear power plant in partnership with Bill Gates TerraPower. The reactor, right now, this is going on right now. This was announced in June of this year. The reactor would be built with one of 4 retiring coal power plants. So they're retiring the coal, the dirty coal, and replacing them by, this is Bill Gates's natrium. That's a sodium cool reactor as opposed to a pressurized water reactor. Here's a little more detail on his natrium reactor. It's a liquid sodium, and of course the advantage of liquid sodium is that it doesn't have to be pressurized. So you don't need a pressurized container. It can operate at atmospheric pressure. But basically, the expert teams of Bill Gates TerraPower and GE Hitachi Nuclear combine their decades of research, unparalleled design expertise, and unmatched technical capabilities to bring innovative natrium or sodium technology to market. It'll be available in the late 20s, making it one of the first commercial advanced nuclear technologies. Bill Gates, as you know, is a strong advocate of nuclear. And here's another development. This is the idea of putting these nuclear reactors on barges, these small modular reactors on barges. This is Seaborg Technologies in Copenhagen, nuclear power barges. And you can anchor them off their major cities. That's where you need the electricity. There's no NIMBY, shouldn't be a NIMBY problem, cheap real estate. You just tether them offshore of major cities, and you have nuclear power 24/7, and they're coming right along. By the way, I must say I first heard about this at MIT several years ago. I heard MIT proposed this floating nuclear reactors, but it looks like this company in Denmark is well on the way. They're saying that the regulatory process is by July, the world's first commercial advanced reactor to obtain feasibility approval from, so it's been approved by the American Bureau of Shipping, and they will commence serial production in just about a year, get the first reactor online in 25, and obtain approval in 26. So it looks like this that this foreign company is also going to be another option for small modular reactors that seems to be coming along and certainly will be available by 2030. Here's another development. China says it's closing in on a thorium nuclear reactor with a prototype reportedly firing up in September. The country teases commercial thorium power. They think by 2030 they'll have thorium. Now, molten thorium, molten salt reactors have the advantage of course, thorium is more abundant than uranium and cheaper. And the waste product, there's no plutonium, bomb grade plutonium waste. Also, there's a lot less nuclear waste in our present reactors. Their experimental reactor actually won't be the world's first. Actually, Weinberg at Oak Ridge National Laboratory pioneered thorium-based molten salt reactors back in the 1950s. And he had a 7.4 megawatt experimental operating in the laboratory over a period for 4 years, although only a portion of its fuel was derived from uranium-233 bred thorium in other reactors. This molten salt reactor was eventually shelved because the Pentagon favored the uranium fast breeder reactor, says Charles Forsberg, principal research at MIT's Department of Nuclear Science and Engineering and a former nuclear research at So in a sense, we were the first to develop thorium, and I must say that our present reactor fleet uses uranium, as does our submarine fleet, and as well as our naval, our aircraft carriers also use uranium reactors. So why we shouldn't fear nuclear? Well, let's look at the data. I mean, 3 Mile Island, nobody was killed. If you were standing next to the reactor during the most dangerous period, you would have got the equivalent of a few chest X-rays. It was well designed, well packaged, as opposed to look at the number of people that have died in coal mine accidents. You've heard in the news. You know, the time the miners were trapped and it was in the news. Will they be rescued? And then you probably heard of I think there's a operator of a coal mine in West Virginia who's in jail because people died in his coal mine because he didn't obey safety regulations. Coal and gas industry. I think we in the Boston area remember when the gas explosions north of Boston a couple of years ago, and somebody's home exploded and someone was killed, and too much gas pressure. So oil and gas. Think of, and as far as oil, I think of that oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico about 10 years ago. Speaking of people were killed on the rigs, and so and coal plants are also put out a lot of soot that gets in people's lungs, and people die of lung cancer. So definitely, nuclear is the safest form in terms just to look at the fatalities of the United States. So question for you guys, which country has the most nuclear reactors?
I'll go first, Paul. I'm going to guess, because I surmise this, France, perhaps?
Well, they were among the most. Yeah, that's true. I'll show you the data in a minute. I'll show you the data slide in a minute. How about the second question? Which country is building the most nuclear reactors right now?
China.
You're right. You're right about China. Let me show you the data. I have my data slide here. Here's the United States. You can see the symbol. United States has 96 reactors, and we're larger than any other country. France has 58, but remember their population is about 1/4 of ours. So, so that's, they have about half the number of reactors that we have, but they have about, I think, 1/4 of the population. That's how come they get, as far as the new reactors are the ones in see, the reactors are the one in brown, and if you look here, the one China's building the most right now. As you can see, they're right, according to this, they're building 11. And there are 2 under construction. There were two reactors. Got to go back here. 2 reactors under construction in the United States, and I think in Georgia and North Carolina or South Carolina. But United States does have the most reactors, and we get 20% of our electricity from our nuclear reactors. Of course, for China since China has 4 times the population, they should probably be building hundreds of reactors rather than, but at least they're building more than any other country right now. They're building the most nuclear reactors right now. So that's all I have on unless you guys would have some quick questions on what I've said so far. I'm going to get into hydrogen now, the potential of hydrogen.
Okay, I have a few questions, and I will preface this by saying these are my personal questions, my personal opinions, and they are not representative of IEEE or Dr. Carr or Mr. Lennart Long. That said, first, I love the idea of thorium molten salt. I'm thinking of naming my new album that I'm recording that. It's amazing. I never knew about that China has taken the initiative that was developed by the United States, and now they are running with it. And allegedly, they, as you said, they ran a prototype of it. What's the future from what you understand for thorium molten salt reactors, Paul?
Well, I have also heard that India is also developing molten salt because they have a lot of it. Because they have a lot of thorium. They do have a lot of thorium, but they have a thorium reactor, and so that's the limit of my knowledge.
Sure.
To tell you the truth. But
Yeah.
it is ironic that it was back in the 50s and 60s. The decision we had a thorium reactor going for 4 years, and we decided not to go with thorium, but to go with uranium. I think part of the reason was remember we were in an arms race, a nuclear arms race with Russia, and we wanted the plutonium to make more bombs.
That makes sense.
Now, of course, it's sort of a problem, but back then we were. I think that's part of the decision. But I might say that one advantage of these molten salt reactors, and I know Bill Gates and some of the progressive companies are working on it. This molten salt also, we have a lot of this spent nuclear fuel, and a molten salt reactor can get the rest of the energy out of that spent nuclear fuel. So that's another advantage of the molten salt reactors, that it could burn up the rest of the energy in our present spent nuclear fuel. So it could help solve our storage problem that we have right now, which is more political than technological.
Sure.
Well, I know that there is government support for next generation nuclear. I know the senator from Alaska has been a strong, there is government funding, and I believe NuScale, I mentioned, developing small modular, is getting some grants from the I think the Department of Energy, and also their first demonstration will be at the Idaho National Laboratory, which is, of course, is a government-funded laboratory. So, that's all I can say, to tell you the truth.
And Paul, you had mentioned about the future being hot nuclear fission, but also small modular fission reactors, and also exploiting geothermal. And you're right, cold fusion was going to be the solution to all of our energy needs, and it just fizzled out. So now, and you're to aim high. Grand ideas sometimes fail spectacularly, so that's okay. But the next step is, as you said, if they can perfect their drilling, not slant drilling, but vertical drilling, and go down deeper, we can tap the benefits of geothermal.
Right. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail shortly.
Okay. And now I'd like to ask too, and these are controversial points, and it's John, with my opinion, not of the IEEE. The first is, we had Fukushima, the meltdown, a severe meltdown, and we're still feeling the effects of that, 2011. Then Chernobyl, Russia, 1986. March of 1979, 3 Mile Island. And your slide pointed out, it was nothing. Yet, 6 months later, September of 1979, Bruce Springsteen put on a No Nukes concert. Recently, just within the past few weeks or so, he's released a No Nukes album. I hold Bruce Springsteen personally accountable for pollution in America, because he led that front over a minor incident at a reactor in New York, and he actually fractured the psyche of the American public to think that nuclear power was bad. So I believe that he owes an apology to not only people within the nuclear industry, but citizens now that have to pay applicable carbon taxes. Okay, there. That's just a comment. Second is, and you're going to go into this, the most bizarre thing George Bush did, aside from seeking phantom yellow uranium in Iraq in March of 2003, was a speech he made on January 28th, 2003, about hydrogen. After that, he was too busy making war around the world. But it went away until just recently. So I'm looking forward to your commentary on hydrogen power and how the United States can position themselves, because it's going to be 14 years it's going to be 19 years since he made that speech. And we're coming to the game very, very late with hydrogen. Unfortunately,
and let me just show you that the Europeans are ahead of us. Let me just show you. This is a statement. This is a slide that I borrowed from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which tends to be conservative. They said by 2050, hydrogen could generate up to 30 million jobs and a 2.5 trillion annual revenue to boost economies worldwide. And the next slide said there are 359 megawatt scale hydrogen projects underway worldwide, including 35 in North America, only 35 in and Europe leads with 201. So you see, they're way ahead of us in terms of hydrogen. And in a sense, that's right. It's sort of too bad that our President Bush, we didn't follow up more vigorously, because the Europeans, they have 201 hydrogen projects, and we have only 35. So And I'll just go on. Is it okay if I go on with hydrogen? Well, okay, I'll go on with hydrogen. Here's a slide that I borrowed from Siemens. And you might know that this is Siemens, is, of course, is probably the biggest producer of windmills. And you can see they're emphasizing windmills in the generation of green energy, green electricity. But you can generate green electricity with solar, hydro, and also nuclear, which they didn't include. But you use the green electricity to electrolyze, put it into electrolyzer, which gives you hydrogen, and hydrogen gets compressed and can be stored in these steel tanks, as shown here. And that's a big plus because for utilities, I mean, people are starting to use some lithium batteries, to store some of the excess energy from solar and wind. But, the battery technology is only stored, you're only talking at the most a day. Well, you could probably store hydrogen for weeks in these pressurized containers. But people are already, utilities are also using hydrogen, introducing green hydrogen into where you can burn it in the same turbines that burn hydrogen, that burn natural gas, will also burn hydrogen, although they have to be a little bit re-engineered for pure hydrogen. But basically, they're starting to do small amounts into the natural gas infrastructure. Now, it's the pipelines and which handle methane will handle small amounts of hydrogen. And one of the advantages of hydrogen is when you burn hydrogen, the main product, the byproduct, is water vapor. There's no carbon, and there's a little bit of nitrogen, which you can clean up with catalytic converters. But that's the big advantage of burning hydrogen, is that there's no carbon or no carbon dioxide emissions. Now, another use of hydrogen is shown here is, so green electricity to hydrolyte, okay, long-term hydrogen exceeds short-term storage times of present batteries. Introducing hydrogens to natural gas pipelines to burn in turbines with no carbon emissions. And we can use green hydrogen to make green ammonia, which is 1 atom of nitrogen and 3 of hydrogen. And liquid nitrogen boils at minus 30 C. Now that's much easier to store than liquid hydrogen, which is minus 253 C. So that's one of the big advantages of green ammonia. And people are talking about using green ammonia, particularly for getting rid of the dirty diesels on the cargo ships. They all burn dirty diesel, basically, and also trains. I'm going to show you actually a train powered by green hydrogen. So anyway, green ammonia also has great potential as well as green hydrogen. And it has the big advantage much easier to store. It's much easier to store something at minus 30 C than it is at minus 253. The storage, the doers required are much easier to come by than that's one of the big advantages of liquid nitrogen, liquid ammonia. It is interesting that right now we're lucky, and right now the price of natural gas in Europe has gone up by like a factor of 3 or 4. And with this potential red rest in the Ukraine, it could go up a lot more. I mean, I think the Russians have a nice advantage there. We're in pretty good shape. We have our own natural gas, but Germany basically has to import natural gas. And if they don't import natural gas when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, they have to burn dirty coal. And so right now, due to the demand for natural gas in Europe and most of the world has gone up like a factor of 3. And right now, as I said, hydrogen, of course, green hydrogen is expensive. The technology still needs to mature more, and I'll show you the progress we've made. But basically, the current new investment and departments announced this week see hydrogen projects developing across Europe, India, Asia, and more. The current climate of high prices for natural gas has led one company to exclaim that green hydrogen is now competitive with the fossil fuel produced gray counterpart, and research continues to optimize hydrogen supply chains and smoothing its integration into the energy landscape. And here is the progress that we've made in the main cost of is the cost of the electrolyzer. And as you can see, already from 2015, electrolyzer costs have dropped 60%, and they're forecast to drop by another 6% by 2050. So that you can see that the prices are coming, and that will make green hydrogen more economically viable. So this particular outfit, StarCraft, predicts that Europe's demand for green hydrogen will increase anywhere from 20 to 20%, corresponding to approximately 1,000 terawatts. So anyway, that's the potential for green hydrogen. So it's competitive with natural gas in Europe right now, and maybe not in the United States. Here's an interesting interview that Dan Bryers of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce interviewed these two gentlemen, Mark Schott from Honeywell and Yuval Steinman from Hyundai. And let me just show you, this gives you some interview of what industry is doing right now. Here's Mark Schott, Senior Director of Carbon Capture and Clean Hydrogen at Honeywell. He says Honeywell can capture CO2 economically from smokestacks or from the air. Of course, it's much more efficient and economical to capture it from the smokestacks. But of course, the issue is what do we do with the carbon dioxide once you've captured? What do you do with it? And one option, of course, is to put it into abandoned oil wells, as shown here. Once you've abandoned them, you still have that underground pipes and so forth. Abandoned oil and frack gas wells down to 1,3 could be a way of sequestering the carbon dioxide that we've recovered. Here's Yuval Steinman, who's of Hyundai Motor Company, and he said that they have a pilot program in Switzerland using pressurized hydrogen gas to generate electricity via fuel cells. This electricity powers the tractor trailer trucks, the big tractor that pull the big trucks. He says lithium batteries for passengers are not viable for trailer trucks, which are powered by diesel. So he's saying that pressurized hydrogen and using that hydrogen to generate electricity via fuel cells is a way of replacing dirty diesel on the large diesel trucks. And of course, the problem is developing the infrastructure for pressurized hydrogen. But here's an example where the French are ahead of us. Here's a hydrogen-powered train in France. Railways are using the gas to clean up diesel routes. As predictable customers, they can cut down the cost of green hydrogen for other sectors. So here's a hydrogen-powered train, can have an electric engine that runs on hydrogen fuel cell and energy captured from braking. And it turns out Saudi Arabia, of course, is one of the world's greatest oil producers. They're using, because they have lots of sun too, and they're using solar photovoltaics to generate electricity and use the green hydrogen to generate hydrogen and also green ammonia. So they're also investing in green hydrogen. Saudi Arabia, they realize that the oil isn't going to last forever, and of course it has the problem of carbon dioxide emissions. But this article says that yet hydrogen-powered trains in France's Alstom have already captured passengers over 100,000 miles on trial operations in Europe. The total lifetime cost of ownership is already comparable to trains running on diesel, hydrogen fuel cells, or electrified lines. And so they're saying the cost of the hydrogen fuel cell powered train is comparable to that of diesel and also overhead electrification. So you see the French are way ahead of us in this. They already have hydrogen powered trains, as you saw. Okay, well, that's where I'm at right now. I'm going to get into deep geothermal unless you have some questions on what I've comments or what I've said. So,
Paul, I never knew there was such a thing as green ammonia. Wow, it's just the green hydrogen, of course, but green ammonia. And for us to get to position ourselves in the United States, it's going to take at least 30 years, correct?
Or at least 20, let's hope it's faster. let's hope we can leverage on the European technology. You notice Siemens. You notice that slide? I borrowed that from Siemens. So you see Siemens, which is probably the world's biggest producer, one of the of windmills, is also getting into green hydrogen. And that slide, it was actually by I think it was the Siemens outfit, and it was Siemens is positioning itself in the United States. So Siemens is apparently developing green hydrogen in the United States. So the Europeans are hopefully will benefit from the European advances in this. But Lena, I want to now move on, if it's okay, unless you have a quick question. Okay to go on.
Go on.
Deep geothermal is poised for a breakout, similar to the horizontal drilling that made natural gas cheaper than coal. And then finally, I'll be talking about hot nuclear fission generated electricity, which is also looks poised for a breakthrough. But this is an article I thought got my attention. Geothermal is poised for a big breakout. An engineering problem that once solves energy, because it's 24/7 energy. And it's green. And Vic Rao, former chief technology and officer at Halliburton, the oil field service giant, recently told the geothermal blog, Heat Blog, geothermal is no longer a niche play. It's scalable, potentially a highly material way. Scalability gets the attention of all the services interested. And here's a geothermal. There are geothermal plants already in California and in the West, because the geothermal, the hot rocks are closer to the surface in the West than they are in the East. But I'll show you that there's still potential even for a hot geothermal in New England, and which I'll show you. Let me just say, why geothermal? The molten core of the Earth is about 4,000 miles deep, is roughly as hot as the surface of the sun, over 6,000. Well, you can see the temperatures. That's why geothermal industry is fond of calling it the sun beneath our feet. The heat is continually replenished by the decay of naturally occurring radioactive elements at a flow rate of roughly 30 terawatts, almost double all human energy consumptions. The process is expected to continue for billions of years. So this is a potential source of energy beneath our feet. And the basic idea is shown here. You basically inject water down deep enough so that the hot rock generates steam, shown here. So you inject water, the hot rock generates steam, and you use that hot steam to generate electricity. That's the basic scenario. But you have to go down, well, fairly deep, but I'll talk about that in a minute. This is called enhanced geothermal. Basically, shown again, fluids are injected into the earth for continuous energy recovery, and the injection causes fractures and resulting in a enhanced geothermal reservoir. The heated fluid are produced back and goes up to the surface and can be used for generating electricity. Here's the potential, United States potential. You see, this is temperatures that are only temperatures that are. This is temperatures that are down 10 kilometers. You know, typical wells now are a few kilometers deep. So we need to. But it turns out that I focused on New Hampshire and New England. You see, we're brown here. So a lot of New England, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine. We're brown. That means that the temperatures down 10 kilometers, even in New England, are 175 C. That's hot enough to make steam. And you're even better off out west. And that's why you have more geothermal out west. There are even proposals, of course, Yellowstone National Park has, hot springs right near the surface. And there's been some talk of tapping that hot geothermal near the surface. But you can see the West has the best geothermal. You don't have to go down so deep. If you go down, you don't need to go down 10 kilometers if you're out west. So the West, I think this is something that California should consider too, because they're investing in wind and solar in the deserts here. But that's still, wind and solar are still 24/7, not 24/7. They're only there 30. Geothermal's there all the time. So the biggest problem facing renewable is that the biggest sources, wind and solar, are variable, whereas fossil fuel power plants that run on coal and gas are dispatchable. They can be turned off on demand. Wind and solar come and go well with the wind and sun. Geothermal temperatures of 175 are available 10 kilometers down in New England and even part of Florida, you can see here. So my feeling is if we're smart enough to learn to do horizontal drilling, we should be smart enough to go down to 10 kilometers, and that you won't have to go that deep in the far in the west. Well, here's a projection for super hot advanced geothermal, and this is, I think, a good overview of here's natural gas, the cost of natural gas. This is in dollars per megawatt hour. That would be about 0.099 cents per kilowatt hour. That's just to relate it to your electricity bill. That's about roughly the cost of electricity now. Advanced nuclear, as you said, 96. Solar photovoltaic, as you can see, read the numbers here. Enhanced geothermal today, fairly expensive, but advanced super hot geothermal looks like it could be the cheapest source of electricity. And here's onshore wind. You get the picture. You get the picture that hot geothermal should definitely be a player. This was a study in 2006, MIT study, to sum up based on our technical and economic analysis. Reasonable investment in R&D and a proactive level of deployment in the next 10 years could make enhanced geothermal a major player, supplying 10% of US-based load electricity by 2050. Further analysis shows that the development of new enhanced geothermal resources will not be limited by size and location of the resource in the United States, and it will occur at a critical time when grid stabilization and both replacement and new base load power will be needed. Because by 2050, our present nuclear reactor fleet will probably be phasing out. So a much needed source of 24/7 energy to generate electricity. Adding EGS options to the U.S. portfolio will reduce growth in natural gas consumption and slow the need for additional expansive natural gas facilities that handle imported liquefied natural gas. So they're saying that by 2050, 10% of our electricity could come from geothermal. That's the study back in 2006. Here's an example of some research. This is a Alta Rock Energy melts rock with using melts rock millimeter waves for geothermal wells. Here's a Seattle-based company received, that's an advanced research project agency. This is government funding grant to test and scale its technology. Here's a researcher here that's using a millimeter waves. Now, millimeter waves, your microwave ovens are centimeter waves. Like your microwave oven has a frequency of about, I think it's around 3 gigahertz, something like that. Well, by going to millimeter waves, by going to a higher frequency microwaves called millimeter waves, they were able to burn this hole in rock, as you can see here. This is a lab demonstration. Here's a test. The water cooling lines leaded to a test chamber, and the hole made in rock. And they're saying that this new technique, this millimeter melting of rocks, promised to increase drilling speeds by a factor of 10. So that's a major advance that should help us go down deeper and tap the geothermal reserves. So I'm finally this is the final part of my talk. A quest for the peace of the sun. I borrowed this slide from Larry Green. Fusion power, past, present, and future. We need temperatures of millions of degrees, and that's what the sun is. As I said earlier, it's a hydrogen reactor with millions of degrees. The question is, how do we get that on Earth? Well, the reaction that we use is we take deuterium, which has 1 proton and 1 neutron, and fuse it with tritium. This is the million degree multi-million magnetic bottle that I'll show you in a minute. And that magnetic bottle, which has temperatures comparable to that of the sun, you get hydrogen shown here and energetic neutrons. And those energetic neutrons are what you use to generate electricity. The advantages of fusion energy no radioactive waste. The gigantic supply of deuterium, 1 out of 3,700 water molecules in the ocean is deuterium. So as long as our oceans don't go dry, we'll have an abundant supply of deuterium, and there are industrial processes for separating out the deuterium, getting heavy water already in place. So we have basically an infinite supply of starting material, deuterium, and there's no nuclear waste. And this is the how we're doing it right now. We have these extremely high magnetic fields. This is a magnetic bottle. So this hot plasma with millions of degrees is confined in a magnetic field, is shown here. And these energetic neutrons, as shown, are absorbed by the walls of this containment container. And we have high temperature fluids coming out here, going into a steam generator. And the steam generates a turbine powering an electric. So this is how the fusion reactors work. Basically, plasma fusion to generate electricity. The multi-million degree hydrogen pressure is magnetically confined. The high energy nucleons heat a cooling fluid to make steam to generate electricity. And this, by the way, back when maybe all of us probably remember that we were in school, where we were in graduate school or undergraduate, people were saying fusion energy is 40 years in the future. Well, it looked like it might be 5 to 10 years in the future. And here's a major breakthrough right at MIT. MIT designed project achieves major advance toward fusion energy. New superconducting magnet breaks magnetic field strength records, paving a way to practical commercial and carbon-free power. And let me just grab my glasses here so I can just read this. This was published just this last September. And it says, it was a moment of 3 years in the making based on intensive research and design work. On September 5th, for the first time, a large high-temperature superconducting magnet was ramped up to a field strength of 20 Tesla, the most powerful magnet of its kind ever created on Earth. Now, just to give you an idea, that 20 Teslas is equal to 200,000 Gauss. Back when I was working with magnets, I thought that maybe 5,000 Gauss or 10,000 Gauss was a large field. 20 Teslas is 200,000 Gauss. So this is it is indeed a world record, a significant world record. And what's the payoff of it? Well, here's this is how it would power a. Well, let me just go through this. Basically, yttrium, barium, and copper oxide. That's the critical technology. Superconducting magnets, and this is this has been demonstrated. Remember, I said this 21 Tesla. Just demonstrated an MIT spinoff last September. 21 Tesla, they're saying here. Now, there is an international thermoelectric reactor in southern France that's been underway and supported by a consortium of many countries in the United States, Russia, Japan, England. They're all funding this, but they're projecting fields of only 12 Tesla. Now, this high field, SPARC, and SPARC stands for Small Private Funded Affordable Compact Robust Reactor. This high field can be 3 times smaller in diameter and 65 smaller than the volume than the ITER under construction in southern France. Stronger fields make fusion smaller, faster, and cheaper. This is being done right at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and they're projecting they might have a commercially viable, at least demonstration by 2025. I think that's optimistic, by 2030, I think. But they've just broken ground here. This is December 2nd, the beginning of this month. Here's a photograph. Construction underway at the Commonwealth Fusion Systems campus in Fort Devens. Some of the billionaires who pioneered the commercialization of space are now using their fortunes to fund companies that create energy source of the stars on Earth. A new round of funding is sending MIT spinoff Commonwealth Fusion Systems into orbit. The startup company just closed on a $1.8 billion funding round, making it the largest in Massachusetts history. Among the backers, billionaires were billionaires Bill Gates, George Soros, and a venture capitalist John Doerr, among others. So in summary, nuclear, hydrogen, geothermal for net zero by 2050. I'm optimistic. Wind and solar are the cheapest source of electricity, but only 33% of the time. Right now, it looked like that since coal fusion fizzled, we need nuclear fission, and it looks like the cheaper, safer, small modular reactors will be available by the end of the decade, 2030. But in the meantime, wind and solar is the cheapest form of electricity if you don't have to do any storage. And right now, wind and solar are only 88%. The National Renewable Energy says, done computer simulation, that our grid can handle a 30% intermittent wind and solar. Our grid can handle 30%, up to 30% wind and solar. So immediately right now, we need to push wind and solar. And right now, adding green hydrogen to the national gas infrastructure will help. But these small modular reactors should be available by the end of the decade. And you see, green hydrogen storage is coming along, as shown here, for storing wind and solar, also for transportation, green ammonia. And then I said, looks like advances in vertical drilling could make enhanced geothermal the cheapest source of electricity, a way of sequestering CO2 and another way of sequestering CO2 from burning fossil fuels. And finally, it looks like hot fusion. Commonwealth is projecting that they might actually have a demonstration of hot fusion by 2025, and certainly by 2050. I thought this is pretty exciting, and I think the most exciting thing is it's happening right here in Massachusetts. It looks like we may well first demonstrate the first commercially viable fusion reactor right here in Fort Devens, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. So that's it. Any more comments or questions? Or
sure. First of all, to think that hot fusion nuclear reactors, that they're actually moving towards that. In the prototyping process, as you say, 2025 may be too aggressive, but certainly a prototype by 2030. We need that, and we need to completely revamp our entire energy, the way we think about energy, the way we think about developing energy. And my problem with geothermal, Paul, is a comment that you said, perhaps by 2050, 10% of all of our energy needs would be satisfied by geothermal. And then, Paul, you spoke of plasma fusion to generate electricity. And you said deuterium is plentiful in the ocean, and hopefully we don't destroy the ocean even more extracting it. But you mentioned tritium or tritium. Is that a rare earth element, and one more rare earth element that we'd have to bow down to China in order to get?
No, fortunately not. What basically tritium is basically it's heavier hydrogen. In other words, deuterium is one neutron, one proton, and one neutron. Tritium is one proton and two neutrons. And it's actually the way we get it is they say they breed it from lithium. Basically, there's a reaction which I didn't go into, but basically they line the walls of the plasma of the containment, plasma containment, with lithium, and there's a reaction whereby the deuterium and the protons in that plasma interact with the lithium and give you tritium. So we basically breed the tritium from lithium, from the lithium wall-lined walls. So it's not something. It's basically built into the way you make a fusion reactor. So so getting them, we basically generate the generation of tritium is part of the process of how these fusion reactors work.
Okay. And finally, you mentioned, and I still can't get my arms around this, the generation of 20 Tesla, 200,000 Gauss. I'm wondering if we disrupted the solar system, let alone our galaxy with that much power. When was that done, or when was that attained? Do you know what the date was?
Yeah, it was done. I think it was announced when it was announced in September.
September?
And the key technology is the yttrium barium copper oxide superconducting wire. And as I understand it, the amount of energy that since it's superconductors at DC and without a magnetic field, there's no resistance. So that's the ideal magnet. But when you do have a magnetic field, there's a little bit of resistance. But I think the numbers that they said that the amount of energy that it takes to make that 20 Tesla field using the superconducting wires is only in the order of maybe 100 watts or something like that. So it's because it's the superconducting wire that makes this technology viable. And if you think about it, what is the energy input? Basically, for fusion to be viable, the electricity output has to be greater than the electricity input, and the main source of the electricity input is to make the magnetic field. And so, with your high temperature superconducting wire, you don't have, it doesn't take much energy to generate the electric field. It's almost like magic. But just to put this in perspective, back when I was a student at MIT, I know MIT does have a history in super high magnetic fields. And I remember back in the days when I was a graduate student there, Francis Bitter was using traditional copper wire for these high field electromagnets, but he was talking about kilowatts and maybe megawatts. And the cooling problem was so severe that they had they had to pipe in water from the Charles River to cool these electromagnets. Just to give you an idea of the breakthrough, the key technology is the high temperature superconducting wire. And by the way, those high temperature superconductors were also discovered in 1989, the same time as people first proposed cold fusion. But it turns out that the high temperature superconductors are real, thank goodness, and that is the key technology as to why Commonwealth fusion seems to be a world leader in high magnetic fields. And of course, the higher magnetic fields means that the reactor is smaller and less expensive to build, basically.
Right. And I'm wondering even what type of gauge wire, a million gauge, to carry that.
I think it's actually ribbon. I understand it's actually ribbon.
Oh, wow.
It's actually ribbon. They actually make superconducting ribbon. That's the way they do it. And it's yttrium barium copper oxide. I did some research on that of the microwave properties of those. They're called high temperature superconductors. The critical temperature is below that of liquid, is roughly around liquid nitrogen temperature. Liquid nitrogen is 77 degrees K. So you only generally need just liquid nitrogen to get the high temperature superconductors to superconduct. So the cooling requirements of the high temperatures are much more modest than I think. Yeah, I think that's why. And I know Ted. We might get Ted Kochansky to comment on. But I know he generally is a very critical thinker. But I must say he is enthusiastic and optimistic about Commonwealth fusion systems. So I don't know if you want an add on to my talk or not, a later date if he might comment, but a lot of that information I got from an email he sent me, and you can see it's hot off the press. I mean, they particularly this 1.8 billion money that they've got from people like George Soros and Bill Gates and other rich people. This is not government funding. These are private investors that are putting their money where their mouth is. I think that's pretty impressive. 1.8 billion from private investors And as they say, it's they're pouring concrete. You saw that it's under construction at Fort Devens, not too far from where most of us live in the greater Boston area.
Right. Well, Paul, again, I want to thank you for the great presentation. Dr. Paul Carr, what a great talk. Thank you, Mr. Lennart Long. Nuclear, hydrogen, and geothermal for net zero CO2 by 2050. I'm John Horrigan. Thanks for joining us.